Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are here for another one of your questions about work. And this is one of these ones that I feel everybody has had this moment. And I have the chance now to talk about this with an old friend or friend of long standing, which I should say, because, well, maybe now you and I both count as old and friends or something like that. But for those of you who are here for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work. And every so often we answer your questions about some practical topic related to a dilemma at work. You can find past topics we've addressed at thisisnotadvice.work. And I'm here with Young Kim, who is the former CFO of Vinebox and played a number of different finance-related roles at companies of different stages and sizes, including in the investor community. And so you've seen a few different companies. And so the question today is, I joined a company and it just doesn't feel the same anymore. It feels like the moment has passed in some way. And how do I think about that? What do I do? And thank you.
Roy, first and foremost, thanks for having me on. It's terrific to be here. Yeah, and this is actually a great question for the day. I mean, you can definitely feel the pulse of the labor market changing, right? Before I dive in, I just want to set up a little bit of context in my background. I think you'll see how they tie together. My background is somewhat unusual. Before working in tech, I worked at a big consulting firm that did a lot of work in turnaround and restructuring. So that means I deal with a lot of clients that are facing trouble. So maybe their markets are in decline and because the economics are unfavorable, or maybe it's a
Sure.
perfectly fine business that, hit a rough patch. So now I work in tech companies and in the e-commerce and consumer businesses. So in combination of two, I for sure I have seen companies that are going up and down. Now you'd expect companies that are in trouble to have employees that feel like, gosh, this is not the company I joined. Something is really different. You can totally imagine that. That makes a lot of sense. But even when companies are prospering, I noticed now that I worked in tech and had been around companies that are successful, revenues are growing, things are great. Sometimes even the growth could be uncomfortable too, right? So maybe you just close a round of financing. New employees are being hired, revenues are doubling and tripling. Even in the moment of prosperity, you can have the feeling that, again, my company does not feel the same to me. What do I do?
Yeah, I love that context. I mean, and I guess I just add the observation that I think how well a company is doing might be uncorrelated to whether people feel that, and that it's more about change or the lack thereof. Sometimes it's change where people grieve something they liked. Sometimes it's everything was so exciting and then it stopped, but it's some amendment in conditions. But yeah, so let's assume you find yourself in that position where something just feels off to you. What thoughts do you have, or what experiences have you had on what people ought to do in that situation?
In my experience, a lot of people join startups for multiple reasons, right? So when one might be sense of adventure, the other might be work on something interesting. But I think a lot of people, Roy, like you described, join startups because they care about the culture and the environment, right? So by that, maybe you care a lot about the project you work on, what the specific set of people, and how you work on it. So I think there's a higher selection bias towards people who care about that, right?
That's a
So
great point.
So trying to be more directly responsive to your question, I think, to the extent that you encounter that moment, I think you're entitled to how you feel, right? I think the first starting point of this journey is I want to start with the legitimacy of your perceptions, right? And I say that because the human mind perceives so many things at the conscious and the unconscious level. And there's so much coming at you now, right? There's screens, there's messages, there's all these communications happening. And so what happens is that, yes, conscious observation captures a lot of information, but it's entirely possible for your passive observation, that subliminal part of your mind, that's picking up stuff that you haven't digested yet. So my
Yeah,
view is that let's start with that feeling and say that it's right.
yeah, yeah, I love that. Meaning that you're sort of in a diagnostic mode at first. Is that what you're describing? Where really you're noticing some data that you're picking up, even if you're not quite sure about why. And then the first step is some curiosity about what is it
Exactly.
exactly that's driving that. I love that insight.
That's exactly it. I call the subliminal part of your pickup of information as the unstructured data. So it's a lot of stuff that's been dumped in your box, right? You haven't sorted through yet. but it doesn't mean there's no value in the perception that you have.
And so then what are some of the frequent reasons that you think come up that people are feeling that, and how do you think about what they ought to do about it?
Well,
I'm
I
going to kind of
suspect.
keep pushing us on the what then, what then, what then, with the understanding, of course, that all of these situations are so different and difficult.
Oh, but I think these are great questions. I think the first step away from that feeling, now having legitimized your feeling, I think the next step is to have the possibility that your feeling needs to be explored further. So what I like to ask in that specific next step is find the commonality, find specific set of circumstances that trigger that perception or your feeling, right? Is it you people that are hired, right? Maybe above you or to a lateral of you, the mix of responsibilities changed. Or is it a new process? Maybe there's a new procedure that's been implemented where such that you can't buy widget from vendor X anymore. You have to buy it from vendor Y because you have to consolidate procurement. Or maybe the expectation changed because you have new owners who have taken over the business. The classic example is going from a venture capital backed company to being acquired by, say, an operating company or a private equity firm. Their perspective is very different how you should run the business, right? And then, is it possible that you just feel more distant from the decision center of the company, the very reason that you might have joined the company, right? And I suspect that there is a good chance there's probably a cluster of themes that emerge when you think about what trigger those feelings, right? Maybe it's localized around a particular idea or circumstance that got you to that.
Yeah, meaning the cluster of themes is something substantive about the business.
Or the encounters you've had that made you feel that way, right?
Yeah,
Maybe the nature
got
of
it.
it.
Meaning some interpersonal pattern. It might have nothing to do with the business and just have to do with the culture of it. And
Exactly.
then as far as common solutions that tend to come up, what are the common solutions that tend to come up?
I think a common solution here is, and I'm trying to think about this in the context of the way that business is run today, right? It's very remote, and oftentimes people are dispersed in different geographies. And I think that the way that people have connected pre-COVID is very different than today, right? So, I mean, let me give you kind of a personal example from the times in earlier part of my career. So, I used to have a boss at an e-commerce company. It was automotive e-commerce, essentially sold cars online. My boss at the time, Michelle, she was a great boss. She gave me a lot of opportunities and allowed me to grow professionally. She left. And so, I'm feeling a little queasy, right? I'm feeling a little nervous because we have a new boss that's coming in. The new boss, Carrie, interacted with me by having, coffee, doing lunch, socializing, taking a walk, right? It allowed me to kind of see each other as a wholly multidimensional people, right? It's not just, Carrie, the source of authority, coming in through this, narrow window. It was a deeper level of relationship you can engage. Now that's harder today. So how do I deal with that now? And that's where I think the idea behind being intentional about how you interact with people matters even more. So things are a little better now, right? During COVID, it was not even possible to go see people inside a restaurant. So is it possible that you can actually interact with people, for example, even through the screen, have regularly recurring meetings that are just not structured. So every day you get to talk 15 minutes without an agenda for some reason, but have essentially a mandatory touch point that's casual, right? Again,
Yeah.
it's a moment of interaction that's not formal.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think this theme of in the time of remote work or Zoom or whatever, that we need to invent new ways of engaging on some of these things that were automatic previously is a really powerful insight. And at the same time, real talk is it feels even harder to do that because every moment is such an opportunity for some efficient outcome. And I struggle with this. It's like forcing yourself to have some unstructured time. Like my team talks about it and I like roll my eyes. I'm like, great, let's waste some time, just talking when I could be getting through my inbox or getting something done. And of course, you're right that in the absence of that investment, the connections become very flat and very brittle. And the question to me is how to do it in a way that doesn't feel painful because it's like, oh my gosh, but I really could just be doing work this whole time.
Yeah, it's a careful balance for sure, because if you got enough people reporting to these 10, 15-minute unstructured window of time really do stack up, right?
Yeah.
So I think, so to give more
Oh, you're talking about doing it one-on-one, not even necessarily as a group.
Or it could be one-on-one or as a group, whatever that works for the organization, right? So smaller organization, maybe one-on-one, but the larger ones, that's just impossible to do stacked back. That'd be very difficult. But there are other things you can do as well. So for example, celebrate the moments, like company anniversary, right? So maybe somebody joined on March 15th and you celebrate as a group March 15th, the anniversary of you joining the company. Recognize personal milestones, personal birthdays, or children's birthday for the employees. And I think there's just a lot more permutation of things that could be done outside the context of immediate interaction on screen. It's a real challenge today.
Yeah, I love that. All right. Well, any other parting thoughts before we wrap for this one? Because I think you've given people a real almost what I'm hearing is almost like a listen to your body starting point of you can just feel it, but then not treating that as the end of it, but just trying to get into more of a diagnosis mode, identify, as you said, that cluster of themes, and then try to create some of those moments that may give you a more rounded way of looking at it, and have you feel some sense of connection to the people involved.
All agreed. And I think the if you recognize the legitimacy of your feelings, then on the opposite end of that experience, you have to recognize the legitimacy of the evolution of your organization, right? And I
Yeah,
think
that's really well put too.
Companies that are growing is like a co-evolutionary process, right? Employees growing and doing more, and companies growing and doing more. And so by having this kind of moment where you recognize that, hey, not the feeling has legitimacy, but the company is changing in a way such that you may pick up the signal that also falls positive in terms of how you feel. You have to accept the possibility that there is give and take in the circumstance.
Yeah, the people who I called them the nostalgists, who were, I've joined companies going through change, who were always unhappy if it changed. That mentality is poison for a company, because the essence of success is navigating what things need to stay the same because they're values driven or tradition that are important to uphold, and what things need to change because you're constantly trying to improve and modernize. And the people for whom everything is the people for whom everything that changes is always a bad thing because grieving is a bad thing, they become an obstacle to change. So I love that. It is give and take is the perfect way to look at it. And there's something, as as a person who's watched before, that we say a lot on This Is Not Advice, is it's a timing and dosage question of how much is you, how much is it, and there's no objectively correct answer. It's all a matter of a match between what an individual wants to do and what an organization wants to do.
Absolutely. It's definitely give and take for sure.
I love that. Well, thank you, Yang. And, for those who are watching for the first time, the reason we say it's not advice is we're giving you our ways of thinking about it. Ultimately, every person has to decide for themselves, and to be continued. And as I said, if you want to find all the past episodes, this one will get posted up there too. You can go to the website, thisisnotadvice.work, not .com. By the way, if you prefer audio, we digest these into bite-sized audio on jam.ai, which is a company in which we invested. You can go look there. And thank you again, Yang. To be continued.
Thank you.